Hello and welcome to the DraftKings Daily Trot. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Scott Mailway, got Sports 25 to life, and talking about this slate tonight. Of course, we got 10 games, so a decent slate. A lot of good pitching options on the mound tonight. We got Clayton Kershaw, $14,200. You got a banged up Bryce Harper on the other side. I obviously like him in this matchup anyway, but that kind of price difference between he and Jacob deGrom of $2,800. Obviously, Kershaw has a higher upside, but I don't mind having some Jacob deGrom where I can't fit Kershaw. Obviously, Kershaw is still your top option, but that $2,800, if it's a significant difference for, say, your second starting pitcher or your hitters, then I don't mind it. But I think they're both in great spots, though.
Yeah, I like both of them, too, especially with that price disparity. I think they're pretty far and away the top two options.
I agree.
The only other two guys I really like a lot up there is I like Cole and Waka, each a decent amount, but they're facing off against each other. It's basically a pick-em line.
Yep.
St. Louis and Pittsburgh, both their offenses are a little up and down. I think Kershaw and deGrom both have way better matchups. I mean, Washington and Colorado have been two of the worst teams over the last 2 weeks. It's really tough to go wrong with those two guys. I'm going to try and pair them in a couple lineups like I did with Sale and Cueto the other day. Obviously, Sale could have been better the other day, but that ended up working out pretty well for me given that I had decent hitters, especially for cash games.
Yeah.
I like pairing them a decent amount. Obviously, that's really expensive. You're getting up over $25,000 of your $50,000 budget there, but with what's left on the slate today, there's not a ton I like as far as like even cheap guys pitching wise. I mean, Andrew Haney is an interesting guy, but he's $8,600. A pretty small favorite against a White Sox team that's been a lot better lately. Not a guy I'm super excited about. I think probably the other two guys that I would look at that are a little bit cheaper. Jake Odorizzi is a slight discount from those guys at $9,900. He's a minus 195 favorite against Atlanta. I think that's a pretty good cash game play if you need to save a little bit of money from those top two guys. Atlanta's a team that doesn't strike out a ton, though. Odorizzi hasn't been a massive strikeout guy himself. I think this could be a really quality game for him, but it could be one of those, like, you could see something like what Matt Harvey did the other day where he went 8 shutout innings, only struck out 4 guys. I mean, that's a really good start, but it's not a great fantasy start. And for $9,900, that you're looking for a lot of strikeouts there. And I think Kershaw and deGrom just have a ton more strikeout upside.
Yeah, I agree there. I think one other interesting option now that he's replacing Mark Burley is R.A. Dickey.
Yep.
He's a guy who you never really know what you're going to get, but he's gone now 6 consecutive starts without giving up more than 2 earned runs, gone at least 7 innings in all but one of those. Not a guy with a lot of upside, obviously, but this is an Oakland team that has really been struggling, and obviously they're worse against lefties than righties, but certainly at $7,800, you expect he's going to get plenty of run support too. So that's a fine option there. One cheap guy that I'm kind of intrigued by in GPPs and makes me sick to my stomach. CC Sabathia, $6,300. He's been very good against lefties. Obviously, in that lefty-lefty matchup, 222 WOBA allowed. He's the exact opposite against righties, 387 WOBA allowed, 21 homers on the year. But when you factor in his price and then you look at which games he's been successful in, it's been against lefty-dominant lineups. Against Seattle, he went 6 innings, just gave up 1 earned run with 7 Ks. That's a lefty-dominant lineup. Boston doesn't hit lefties very well. Went 6 innings, 1 earned, 8 Ks against them. This is a pretty lefty-dominant Cleveland lineup. You got guys like Chris Johnson, names brought in. You got Ryan Rayburn, Yan Gomes. But outside of that, it's pretty much all lefties. So I think at his price, I think he's a risk that I'm willing to take in some GPPs.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's a really good matchup. Really, the only thing I have against him is I saw you ask this question on Twitter this morning who's your favorite platoon guy, and Ryan Rayburn is probably my favorite platoon guy out of everyone. I love him today at $2,200.
Yep.
So that's the one thing that's going to keep me off Sabathia a little bit. But I agree with everything you said. I think it's a great matchup. Really, the only guy that scares me in that lineup against a lefty is probably Rayburn, and he's not like his ISO is over 200 against lefties. He's got a massive WOBA, but he's not a guy that you're like super terrified of by any means. He's
not
the
Chris
cleanup.
Young. That's what you're
Right.
saying.
Yeah, there you go. He's not Chris Young. I know that's who you guys were on.
Yeah.
He's been red hot lately. Rayburn's been a guy that's just I love playing against lefties for his really cheap price over the last couple of years. And so that's my take on that one. That's really the only thing holding me back on Sabathia at all. Any lineup I don't have Rayburn in is probably going to be the ones that I mix Sabathia into. I think he's a really solid play at that price on DraftKings tonight.
Definitely. One other pitcher I'll discuss for a second about a GPP option is Danny Salazar. He does have some long ball issues, but he also strikes out more batters than anyone other than Clayton Kershaw on tonight's slate, over 28%. And he's been solid recently. So, I mean, I think against the Yankees team that's actually struggled a little bit recently, certainly a lot of hitters you're worried about there, but also a lot of aging hitters. So, Danny Salazar certainly has upside today, but he doesn't come without risks. So, not a cash game play for me, but he has that 10K upside.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's a GPP play only for me, but I do like the upside. Like I mentioned earlier, there aren't a ton of guys with a lot of strikeout upside on this slate outside of the top guys, and he's one of them, even though he's still pretty high priced, but definitely is a GPP play. He's interesting.
Definitely. And to move over here to catcher, Kyle Schwarber. Matt Garza is not very good against left-handed batters, to be polite about it. 367 WOBA allowed this season. So obviously Schwarber, if you're paying up, that's the guy that I want. His teammate, Miguel Montero, is actually really cheap, only $2,900. So he should be in the lineup. I think he's a nice, cheap way to get some exposure to Matt Garza there. Russell Martin, of course, at home. You're always considering him, $3,900. That righty-righty matchup. And Dioner Navarro, if he's in, I don't really like that he's $3,100. I think he's a little bit pricey considering he doesn't have a lot of upside. But I think he's a fine play. I think I still prefer John Jaso, though, if I'm playing somebody at $3,100.
Yeah, that's about where I'm at. I don't mind Gomes, a couple of these other guys. I definitely like Jaso the most, though, against a pretty weak righty in Weisler. I mean, Grandal has some upside for GPPs if you're looking for something like that. Zimmerman's a much better pitcher than most of these other guys we've named that catchers are facing tonight, though. Grandal just seems a little cheap. It's probably because of the matchup. I like him as a GPP play, but if I'm looking at cash games, Jaso, Yan Gomes, then if I'm paying up, like you mentioned, Schwarber's the top option in my opinion.
Definitely. First base options, you got Albert Pujols still seems too cheap in a solid matchup. He kind of seemed like he was last night, but obviously the whole Angels team kind of shut down by Rodon. $4,200 against John Danks. We know the story with Danks. Every once in a while he surprised us with a good start. I'm not a believer that tonight's going to be one of those nights. Bad against righties. One of the best, probably the best righty-righty duo, Pujols and Trout tonight. So you figure at least those two will do some damage. Got to like him. Anthony Rizzo I like a lot, but I don't feel like I'll be paying $5,400 for him outside of maybe just a couple GPP lineups. Who else do you like outside of these guys?
I actually prefer Jose Abreu to Rizzo as far as GPPs go. He's about $500 cheaper. I like the matchup a little bit more with a lefty and Haney against him. I mean, Rizzo's been pretty good against righties, but he hasn't been like earth-shattering good against righties, and I just don't want to pay $5,400 for that. Abreu feels like he has a little bit more upside. Adrian Gonzalez is a guy I think is also too cheap. Another Dodger. He's only $3,700. Zimmerman has not been good enough to drive his price down to $3,700 in my opinion. I think he's a really solid cash game play. And then the other two guys that I like for GPPs are Mitch Moreland and Prince Fielder, both facing off with Pelfrey in Minnesota. I mean, Fielder's just been incredible basically all season. 412 WOBA against righties. Only a 161 ISO. He's been, I don't want to say struggling with power because he's been hitting the ball really hard. He just hasn't had the home run stroke going most of the season. But, I mean, against Pelfrey in his career, he's got 28 at-bats against him. And he's hitting 357 with 4 home runs. So, I mean, everything points to Prince Fielder being a really good play today. I don't know if he, stands out a ton past a lot of these other guys that we talked about, but I think the Texas stack in general with all their lefties is a really strong play tonight.
Yeah, I'm completely on board with that. I think that's a great way to go. Unfortunately, you can't play both Moreland and Fielder. Mix them in, though. One more cheap guy that I do like, C.J. Cron, another righty against John Danks. Obviously going to be low owned because he's the same position and same matchup as Albert Pujols, but I like targeting him in some tournaments. And then, as we always do against a weak pitcher, especially with Edwin Encarnacion banged up, Justin Smoke at $2,500. He's got some power upside as well.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, second base options. I like Brian Dozier, $4,500. Nick Martinez is pretty awful against lefties and righties. We all know the drill here. You mentioned the Texas lefties, so Rookie Odor at $4,200 is certainly in play. And then below those guys, Ben Zobrist is just, outside of last night, we know the drill with him. He's just been very consistent. Gets Daniel Norris, who's been okay, but I think Zobrist at $4,100 is still a perfectly fine play.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I like Zobrist quite a bit as a GPP play. I don't like him quite as much as a cash game play today. Odor is probably my favorite cash game play against Pelfrey. He just seems rock solid at 4,200. There's a couple other guys I don't mind. One guy that's interesting is a GPP play against Kershaw, Anthony Rendon, who we mentioned a ton. It seems to face a lefty at least every other day these days. I mean, he's still crushing lefties. He had a nice game against one the other day. Obviously, Kershaw's a really tough matchup, but his price is all the way down at 2,700. He makes a pretty interesting value play if you're looking for something like that in GPPs.
Yeah, I'm with you there. There's a couple other cheap guys around that price. Scooter Gennett, $2,800. Yep. Jason Hamill hasn't been great against lefties. Johnny Giavotella, if he's batting at top against John Danks at 31. And then the other guy, I obviously prefer him at shortstop, which isn't a very good position today. Jose Ramirez at $2,800 against Sabathia.
Yeah, definitely. I'll throw in another shortstop eligible guy, Jose Peraza for the Dodgers, has been hitting second with Howie Kendrick out of the lineup. He's 3,200, which is a little steep for me against Zimmerman, but I don't mind him as long as he's second in the order for that price.
Yeah, that's not a bad option for a guy at the top of the order. Third base, Josh Donaldson is $6,100. I mean, you love him in GPPs against anyone. You know his ownership will be low with elite pitching on the mound and that price tag, but I don't know how much exposure I'll have because that is an insane price tag for him.
Yeah, especially with a lot of options at third base today, around like 4,000. Adrian Beltre against Pelfrey, Miguel Sano against Nick Martinez, Chris Bryant against Matt Garza, even Carlos Santana against CC Sabathia is interesting if you're not using Sabathia. Evan Longoria at 3,800 isn't a bad play against Weisler. There's a lot of like mid-range third base options today, which I think is going to keep his ownership way down, which makes Donaldson a really interesting GPP play. But I mean, you got to make a lot of concessions elsewhere to play a guy for 6,100 at third base.
Yeah, you're likely paying down for both your pitchers to be able to get them in a lineup you feel even decent about. But with all those guys you mentioned there, those are obviously the guys I'm targeting too. Really nobody that stands out a lot as far as really cheap guys, except for one guy, Chris Johnson. He's $2,000 flat minimum. Yep. All he does is hit lefties well. Not a guy that does anything else, but that's why the Indians brought him in, because they need guys that can hit lefties. And absolute minimum, I think he's a great punt option at third base.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's not anyone else that I like a ton. I mean, Micah Viles is 2,300 against a lefty. He's another guy that has hit lefties pretty well in his career, but he has no power, and I'm not really excited about that. Outside of that, like you said, there's not a ton cheap-wise to feel very good about. I guess Trevor Plouffe, but I prefer Sano if you're going with a Minnesota third baseman, so he's going to be super low-owned also. I think that's about it at third base for me.
Yeah, same here. Other options here at shortstop, of course, Troy Tulowitzki is always, if not your top option, but in consideration today, he's definitely your top option. There's really nobody that's close, if you ask me, when you don't factor in price at least. $4,900 is expensive, but he's definitely got the biggest upside. I still like his Drupal Cabrera at $3,400 for tournaments. He had another nice game last night, 2 hits with a double, so he's a fine option against Whistler tonight. And then we already mentioned Jose Ramirez. I like him at $2,900. I don't really see a whole lot else that really just stands out to me. Is there anybody cheap that you see?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of the usual guys. I mentioned Peraza at second base shortstop. He's 3,200. I like Ramirez a little bit better, I think. As far as Ramirez, like you mentioned, I mean, Francisco Lindor is only 3,400 against Sabathia today. He's been really good against righties more than lefties for the most part, but Sabathia has been terrible against people hitters from the right side of the plate. So I mean, he's like up in the air a little bit as a GPP play for me, but I'd rather have Sabathia in my lineup against Cleveland than actually play him, I think.
I agree.
Jimmy Rollins is the last guy I have on my list, 2,900 leading off still. I mean, he's just the same as he was early in the season when he was hitting leadoff. He's a fine play. He's not super exciting, but I mean, he's too cheap again today at 2,900, even though it's Zimmerman.
Yeah, he's one of those plug-and-play type of guys because he's just in a good enough spot that due to his price tag for sure. Outfield options, Mike Trout against John Danks. We shouldn't need to tell you about that. Jose Bautista against the young Aaron Brooks. He's $5,800. He's pretty pricey, but I prefer Trout to him, of course, with John Danks on the mounds. Lorenzo Cain, as he always is, had another ridiculous game last night. 4 for 4, a home run, a double, scored a couple runs. I mean, this guy, I'll definitely say he's the best player that never gets played enough. The guy's incredible. $4,800 against the lefty. I like him against all lefties, but Daniel Norris giving up quite a bit of hard contact as well. So love Lorenzo Cain if I'm paying up.
Yeah, a couple more mid-range price guys. Chris Coglin's been hitting third in the lineup for the Cubs. He's 3,100 against Garza. Not a guy with a ton of upside, but I feel pretty good about him at that price. Another Cub, Dexter Fowler's only 3,900 hitting leadoff. If you're attacking Garza today, I don't mind Delino DeShields if he's hitting leadoff for Texas. He's not one of the lefties, but I think he's a pretty solid play at the top of that order with all those big bats behind him. Gregory Polanco remains too cheap for me. He's up to 3,800. He's facing Waka, but I mean he's been hitting everyone lately. 3,800 for a leadoff guy, as hot as he is just way too cheap right now. Outside of that, I mean, not a ton else I like in the mid range. And I mentioned Rayburn already as my favorite cheap play by far. He's only 2,200, hitting cleanup most likely against Sabathia. He's been a little banged up lately. And then I think he also missed, I don't know, 2 games that he wasn't going to play anyway on the bereavement list or something like that. So it'll be interesting to see if he's back tonight. If he's in the lineup, he's going to be in a ton of my lineups. Coco Crisp is really cheap again, although it's really hard to recommend playing him at this point because he doesn't do anything.
Yeah,
he's a flat 2,000. Yeah, he's a flat 2,000. He's probably going to hit second again tonight. So.
Maybe he gets hit by a pitch, he'll steal second.
There you go. You need him to get on because he's still super fast.
Yeah.
Couple other cheap guys, Grady Sizemore, 2,400, hitting second again. He's been an interesting play over the last couple weeks. Nothing special, but he's a guy that can provide some value for you at that price. And then Michael Bourne for Atlanta is back in the leadoff spot lately. He's only 2,600. Odorizzi's a pretty tough pitcher, but 2,600 for a leadoff guy is not a bad option.
No, not at all. I like Michael Kadire, too, at $3,100.
Yeah.
Just came back from injury, stole a base. So, at his age, if he's out there running on the base paths, he's good to go. And then some big-time upside, Yasiel Puig at 3,000. Not a lot of other cheap guys, aside from the guys that you mentioned, that I'm really looking at. I do like Danny Valencia. He's kind of pricey at $3,400, but, I mean, he's just been raking. So you got to like him a little bit against Dickey. I was kind of hoping that Burley would be in the lineup and I could get a lefty with him.
Yeah, definitely.
But, maybe tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow we get that. So, all right, that's going to wrap things up for us today. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.